Hello friends, I'm Deepthi Sharma and today I'll be doing calculation of consumer and producer surplus before and after tax. Okay, first let's just understand what a consumer and a producer surplus is. So in this diagram, I have my price on my y-axis, I have my quantity on my x-axis, I have my demand curve here with D, I have my supply curve here with S. Now wherever they intersect, that gives us equilibrium price. I have marked that as P star, and it also gives me equilibrium quantity, which I have marked as Q star. All right. Now any area which is above my equilibrium price but below my demand curve, this area, right, all this area is my consumer surplus. I have marked it with my vertical lines. Okay, so in simple meaning, it means that the difference between what the consumer is willing to pay, the consumer is willing to pay this much price, right, for this much quantity, but what he actually pays, he pays only P star. So the difference between the two is my consumer surplus. Okay, so that's why this entire triangle is my consumer surplus. Similarly, for the producer surplus, my area is below the equilibrium price but above the supply curve. So this entire triangle is my producer surplus. Now this is basically the difference between what the price at which the producer is willing to sell a particular unit of a commodity and the price at which he or she actually sells that commodity. The difference between the two is your producer surplus. So I've marked it with horizontal lines. So this triangle is my producer surplus. Okay. All right. So now before going how consumer and producer surplus they get affected with tax, let's just calculate consumer and producer surplus before the tax. Okay. Okay, in this diagram I have taken hypothetical figures. Okay. And so I have 20 as my where my demand curve intersects the y-axis. Basically it says that at when the price is 20, so my demand is basically 0. That's what it says, right? So that's I have taken as 20, the price 20. And then where my supply curve intersects the y-axis, I have taken that as 2. Okay. And where they intersect, that's my equilibrium. So my equilibrium price is given by 8 and my equilibrium quantity is given by 6. Right? As explained above, this RVU, this area, so basically above the equilibrium price and below my demand curve, this triangle gives me my consumer surplus. Okay, and this area which is below my equilibrium price but above the supply curve gives me my producer surplus. Sorry about that. All right, gives me my producer's surplus, this triangle. So basically UVT triangle gives me my producer surplus, RVU triangle gives me the consumer surplus. Okay, now the calculation is very simple. So for the calculation, let's just say consumer surplus is given by a triangle RVU, and we all know that the area of a triangle is given by this formula, which is half into base into height. Okay, so half into 6 into 20 minus 8, so half into 6 into 12, and with all the cancellations I get 36. I'll just explain to you how we get 6 and how we get 20 minus 8 as height and 6 as the base. Okay, half is there, right? So the base we get 6. So I want the base as this because this is the base of the triangle and this is the height of the triangle. this is 6 given to us, right? So from 0 to here, this point is my 6, and since this line is parallel to this line, so this UV, that's your base, is your 6. Now how do I get this height of the triangle? So from 0 or O, whatever you say, right, here till here it's marked as 20, and from here, from 0 to 8, it's marked, and I mean from till U, it's marked as 8. So this 20 minus this 8 gives me this leftover line segment, right? Which is 20 minus 8 gives me 12. So this RU basically is my 12. So that's how I get half into base into height. Okay. Similarly, we go for the producer surplus. Since it's also a triangle, so the formula remains the same. So it's half into base into height. So half into base is again 6. That's the base. In this case, this is the base. So that's the base. It's 6. And height is given by this UT. Correct? So since from here till here, till U, it's 8. So this 8 minus this 2. I've taken this T point as 2, right? So this 8 minus 2 gives me my height as 6. This is 6. So my formula gets half into base into height, which is half into 6 into 8 minus 2, which is 6 in case of producer surplus. So with all the cancellations, I get 16. So the total surplus that I get from this activity is 36, that's the consumer surplus, plus 18, that's the producer surplus, and I get 54 as the total surplus. All right. Okay. So now going forward, let's say there's an imposition of $3 tax per unit tax by the government. Okay. Now, how this changes the consumer surplus and producer surplus, plus who bears the burden of the tax? Is it just the producers? Is it just the consumers? Or both of them? Okay. All right. Let's start. In this diagram, so I have taken the same numbers. Okay. So it's 20 and I have the same labeling as well. Okay, what you have to understand is earlier the original point is where I have D as my demand and I have S as my supply curve. V was the point of intersection, if you'll just refer to the previous diagram as well, right? 6 was the equilibrium quantity, 8 was the equilibrium price, okay? And that was my original diagram. And we have O here or 0 here, whatever you say. Okay. Now with the imposition of per unit tax of $3, this supply curve increases vertically, right? It goes towards right vertically. So there's a parallel shift, okay? This shift. I have marked that as S bar, okay? All right, so this area, basically this shift is your $3 shift. I draw a horizontal line from there, okay? And I draw a horizontal line from there as well, from the lower part and from the upper part. So this is the vertical shift, okay? 8, remember, was my equilibrium point, equilibrium price before the tax, okay? Now with this new tax being imposed, I have, when I draw this horizontal line, let me give a number. I give it as 7, let's say. And since the tax is 3, so obviously the difference between this and this has to be 3. If I am giving this as 7, then I have to give this horizontal line a number of 10. That is why I have this area, basically your BC, right, line, or you can say your AD line is 3, which is the tax. So 10 minus 7 gives you 3. So this area is your 3. Okay, understood? All right, rest the numbers are the same. Okay, one more thing that we get is basically a new equilibrium quantity, because now your demand curve intersects your supply bar at B. Earlier it was at V, but now due to the imposition of tax, the intersection has moved to B. Always remember, when you calculate the tax, it's not the diagonal line that you have to see, it's always the vertical distance between the supply curves that you have to notice. Okay, so that's why I'm not looking at BV, but I'm looking at BC, and that's why I've drawn these two horizontal lines here. Okay, so now the important point is that this 10 is the price including tax. Okay, and this is the price at which the buyer buys, because that's intersecting the demand curve, right? So this is the price at which the buyer buys, that is 10. However, the supply curve at this equilibrium quantity, which is 5, which is the new equilibrium quantity, at this equilibrium quantity, this original supply curve intersects at this point, and that is basically at 7. So the price at that point is 7. That is, at the new equilibrium quantity of 5, the price that the producer is getting is 7. Okay, the $3 that the consumer is paying excess is actually the tax that goes to the government. Okay, so earlier the producer was getting 8, but now the producer is getting 7. Earlier the consumer was paying only 8, but now the consumer is paying 10. This is in terms of price. In terms of quantity, earlier the equilibrium quantity was at 6, but now the equilibrium quantity is at 5. So are you looking at how the imposition of tax is basically changing the entire structure? Okay. So now in this new scenario, how do we calculate consumer surplus and producer surplus? Okay. Now the consumer surplus will be your area, as I had told you earlier, that consumer surplus is the area above your equilibrium price, but below your demand curve. So it will be given by the area triangle RBA, right? So this triangle gives you your consumer surplus. Okay. Now the same formula we apply, that's half into base into height. Half into base, this is the base now, so this is the base now. So 0, 5 basically, or 5. So 5 is the number. Since this is parallel to this, so your AB is the base, so we have AB as 5. And now we need this height. This height will be the same way as we calculated for the earlier one. So this whole 20 minus this 10 will give you this height, RA. Right, that's what I've written. So it's half into 5 into 20 minus 10, which is 10. So with all the cancellations, I get 25 as an answer. So the consumer surplus for RBA is 25. All right. Okay. Now similarly, we find the producer surplus. So in this case, now the producer surplus is given by your area of DCT. Now remember, producer surplus will find with what I told you was the difference between what producer is willing to sell at, the price at which he or she is willing to sell at, and the price at which he or she actually sells at. Now in this case, after imposition of tax, the price that at which he or she sells at is 7 and not 8. Okay, because that's the price he or she gets for the equilibrium quantity of 5. All right, which we see with the intersection of the old supply curve at equilibrium quantity of 5. All right, so this DCT, this triangle, gives me my producer's surplus after a tax is imposed. Now same as this, it's half into base into height. So half into the base, that's DC, that's the base. So it's 0.5 again. So 5 is what the base is. And height is given by this DT, this one. So this is again given by 0 to 7, right? So this whole minus your this whole. That's from 0 to 2 or T gives me my height of DT, which is 7 minus 2. So that's what I've written. Half into base, which is 5, into 7 minus 2. All right. So that gives me half into 5 into 5, which is 12.5. That's my producer's surplus after a tax is imposed. Now we come to the tax revenue for the government. So how much the government actually gets now? Okay, so tax is imposed. Obviously the government has imposed taxes in order to earn its revenue. So how much the government gets? So government gets tax which is equal to the area of rectangle ABCD. I'll go back again and show it to you. Okay. So now in this, as I told you, this difference of 10 minus 7 is what 3 is the tax area is. So A, B, C, D, this triangle is your tax revenue for the government, right? And how do we calculate the area of a rectangle? So it's basically your length into your breadth. So it's your length, which is your 5, into your width, which is 3, that's the height, 10 minus 7, which is 3, and this is given by your 5. So 5 into 3, which is given to be $15. So this area or the tax revenue collected by the government is $15. Okay. All right. So we come to this point where we have now, how do we calculate the deadweight loss? Okay. Now deadweight loss is basically the loss that incurs to the society. I mean, it's a part of a surplus that goes neither to the consumer nor to the producer. So that's wasted. That's why it's called a deadweight loss, right? Now, deadweight loss is given by your triangle BVC. Okay, I'll just show you that again. So in this diagram, coming back to this, earlier my equilibrium price was 8, my equilibrium quantity was 6, and so this whole area was my consumer surplus, RVU, and UVT was my producer surplus. So in that case, where there was no imposition of tax, there was no deadweight loss, right? Just at the equilibrium, this whole part was going to the consumer, this whole part was going to the producer, and we were good. However, after imposition of tax, my equilibrium quantity reduced to 5. Now I have everything calculated on this equilibrium quantity. My consumer surplus is this. My producer surplus is this. This goes to the government as tax revenue. However, this little triangle is left out from my earlier calculations, right? BVC. This little triangle is left out, and this little triangle is what we call as dead weight loss. Okay. All right. So now coming back to this, how we calculate this dead weight loss. Now there are two ways. One, you can again calculate with the area of a triangle. So you have this triangle BVC. So it's half into base into height. You can do that. Or you can also say that total surplus before tax, whatever we had, minus the total surplus after tax, that gives you your dead weight loss, right? So total surplus before tax we calculated, the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus was 54. However, after the imposition of tax, the total surplus was the tax revenue area, which I just showed you, and the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. So I have 15 plus 25 plus 12.5, which gives me 52.5. So the subtraction between the two gives me 1.5. So that's my dead weight loss. Okay. Now there's one more thing which I want to explain in this, and that's really important, that those $3, how are those $3 distributed among consumers and producers? I mean, how much burden is on the consumer and how much burden is on the producer of that $3 tax. Okay. So the tax burden on consumers we calculate with the area of ABMU. I'll just show it to you. That is given by 10 minus 8, which is $2 into my 5 units. That's my equilibrium quantity. That's $10. So I'll just show you how that is equal to. Okay. So my tax burden. So my total tax going to the government was this. A, B, C, D rectangle, right? Now, just look at this. Earlier, the equilibrium price was 8, okay? Now, the price that the consumer pays is 10. So, this basically this area, ABMU, is the tax that the consumers are bearing, right? Earlier they were paying just 8, but now they are paying 10. So they are paying $2 more. So this $2 into the quantity that they are consuming, which is 5. So 2 into 5 gives me this area, which is $10. Okay. Now similarly for the producers, earlier the equilibrium price for them was 8, but now they are settling down at 7. So the area of this little rectangle, UMCD, this tiny rectangle, right, gives me the area or the cost that is on the producers. So the tax burden on the producer is given by this little rectangle. And since the difference is just $1, because earlier they were getting 8, and now they are getting just 7. So that's a $1 drop. And the equilibrium quantity is 5. So it's 1 into 5, which gives me $5. Okay. So that's how I have calculated these two things. So tax burden on consumers is 10 and tax burden on producers is 5. Now, which goes very well with, if I just combine the two, I get 15 as my total tax revenue, which is equal to what the government is getting, right? So my calculations are correct. All right. So I hope you liked this and you understood this. And I know it was a bit confusing and long, but it's very helpful. All right. See you in my next session. Bye-bye.